you for coming tonight and introduce Dr. Peter Crappo. Is that how I pronounce it?
That's the guy.
The Pediatric Associates of Crofton. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
If anybody has any questions or needs anything, just thank you.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all you brave and hardy souls coming out tonight. You have a strong sense of masochism, and I appreciate it. We're going to talk about something called the Children's Year. It's a topic that Brenda, my wife, will assure you is sort of an endeavor for the entire family. I think everybody, as they go to different places, always find or hopefully find something that engages them, that interests them. And as a pediatrician, clearly I'm going to be interested in things that relate to children. And more than 35 years ago, my wife and I had gone to an antiques mall that was then in Kingston on our way down to Plymouth. And we figured out that as antiques collectors, we're collecting things that our children will never seem to want in the future, but we've certainly enjoyed having them. I turned a corner at this particular flea market and I saw this poster. And I said, well, that's kind of cool, really. The health of the child is the power of the nation. It shows this interesting, group of children heading uphill. Not a lot of diversity in this group of kids, but you can tell it's early part of the 20th century in terms of these wonderful things called knickers. Apparently, I never had knickers, by the way, but apparently boys had these shortened pants with those sort of long socks. And it's a very positive kind of, I think, model kids heading uphill and looking hopefully to some bright future. Then if you look at the bottom, it talks about the Children's Year, April 1918 to April 1919, from the United States Children's Bureau and Women's Committee on the Council of National Defense. And I said, wow, sounds interesting, sounds like a real program, sounds like something that might be fairly interesting. And I purchased this before we had this wonderful thing called the internet. And in fact, you could get a little bit of information about this particular program, but not a lot. There wasn't a lot out there till the internet arrived. And so this has sat proudly in my study for about 35 years. And I was up in Maine giving a talk once, and my wife and I went to another antiques mall, and lo and behold, we discovered this one. The Children's Year, April 6, 1918 to April 6, 1919. Fathers and mothers of America, Uncle Sam says, are your children up to their standard in height and weight? Bring your children under school age to be weighed and measured. We're going to talk a little bit about the genesis of the program, and I don't think it's a total coincidence that the little boy who's standing up being measured wears a sailor suit. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that might impart. And I think for those of you who remember baby scales back in the 20s and 30s, that's exactly what they look like. So the Children's Year, saving 100,000 babies, getting a square deal for children. And again, the dates, April 1918, April 1919. And again, we're in the middle of the First World War. America was late to the dance in terms of World War I. I think Woodrow Wilson did his level best to keep us out of what was then called the Great War. And there were some impetus to declare war against the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, and Turkey. There was the sinking of the Lusitania, which some people said this might get us into war, but didn't. And then something called the Zimmerman Telegram. For those of you who are interested in history, apparently Zimmerman, who was an official at the German embassy, sent a message to Mexico saying, if you join us in a war effort against the United States, we will get you back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And this apparently was the major impetus that said it really is time to go to war. So saving 100,000 babies, and I think this relates to what was happening at the time, because at that time in the 1916, 17, 18, 1920s, about 100,000 children died before their first birthday in the United States. So the notion of being able to save children had a certain desirable ring to it. So what were the organizations that were doing it? As I said, the campaign was orchestrated by the Children's Bureau and the Women's Committee of the Council of National Defense. And the slogan for the program was, the health of the child is the power of the nation. The Children's Bureau was formed in April of 1912 by signed by President Taft. It was a new bureau that was designed to investigate and report on issues related to the welfare of children. And it was going to look at issues related to mortality, birth rate, orphanages, juvenile courts, desertion, dangerous occupations. And remember, children, of course, were employed in the 1920s, 1920s, in some jobs that most people would find too dangerous today, even for adults. Issues of occupation, accidents, in essence, all issues related to the needs and well-being of children. World War I really gave emphasis to the needs of children, and it looked at children as a national asset. And I think one of the reasons, and this is probably not the perfect reason, but one of the reasons that this was a concern is that we had the first universal draft in World War I. And something like a third of the recruits who were drafted to fight in the Great War were not fit to be employed as soldiers. In fact, there were a variety of illnesses that frankly should have been corrected in childhood that were ignored. So the reality here is that children were the power of the nation, but in essence, these are people who ultimately will be caring for all of us as we get older. The 20th century really did herald an increase in concerns related to child welfare. Up until now, children had sort of been the extension of their parents and not really a developmental life stage. But the reality of the Great War in Europe was that clearly issues that help to protect mothers and children ultimately will benefit the nation. So the Children's Bureau, as I noted, was started in 1912 to report upon issues related to the welfare of children. And again, these are the sort of issues that the Bureau was designed to handle. And again, as I said, something like a third of the military recruits were unfit due to diseases that had been developing in childhood. It was a distinct war message. Wilson said, this effort is second only to the importance of supplying the immediate needs of the combatants. And think about that for a second. He said, soldiers first, obviously, lives on the line, but children and their mothers second in terms of making sure that they have opportunity or future for successful lives. So the campaign itself was saving 100,000 babies, and the Women's Committee, it was a coordinating committee along with nurses, doctors, and social workers. The Women's Committee of the Council of National Defense was created just 15 days after Germany had war declared against it. And it was actually a fairly substantial body. It included the Secretaries of War, Navy, Interior, Agriculture, Commerce, and Labor. And it was authorized by an act of Congress prior to our entering World War I. The committee was organized into 12 divisions: food conservation, food production, home economics, education, women in industry, social and welfare work, liberty loans, health and recreation, child welfare organizations, registration, maintenance of existing social agencies, and foreign relief. Woodrow Wilson actually endorsed the Children's Bureau campaign as patriotic. Change of glasses. Next to the duty of doing everything possible for the soldiers at the front, there could be, it seems to me, no more patriotic duty than that of protecting the children who constitute a third of our population. Attention is now being given to education and labor conditions for children by legislators across the country. I am glad that this process is happening. I heartily approve of the Children's Bureau and the Women's Committee of the Council on National Defense for making the second year of the war one united activity on behalf of children in that sense of Children's Year. I trust that the year will only see the goal reached of saving 100,000 lives of infants and young children, but that the work may so successfully develop as to set up certain irreducible minimal standards for health, education, and work for the American child. And think about what that just says. Irreducible minimum standards for health, education, and work for the American child. And I think this was really a call to arms in terms of making sure that children had opportunity and the services they needed to grow up as healthy individuals. And of course, you could get a sepia picture of Woodrow Wilson to post in your home in tribute to Woodrow. So when you think about the campaign itself, there were 17,000 women's committees and 11 million women who participated in this campaign, along with, as I said, doctors and social workers. And they dealt with issues of health, education, child labor, and recreation. There's another poster I don't have, but make your child a better American. Education brings success. Keep your child in school next term. And there's a little bit of a hidden agenda here, because clearly we want children to be educated so they can take their rightful place as useful citizens. But there really was concern, because of the gear up of war industries, that a lot of children were being employed in factories making, among other things, munitions. And there was a real concern that when soldiers returned, there would be competition between the children, and I say children in this case, sometimes young adults, who were being employed and actually making very good money for the time, as opposed to soldiers returning from the front. So this really is a double-edged sword here, because it's clear we want children to be educated, but the hidden agenda here was to make sure that there were jobs available for soldiers when they returned. So one of the campaign components was measurement of height and weight. And if you look at the poster on the far left there, this really does refer to this as an indication of the health status of children. If you think about the picture of the Gerber baby, the round cherubic face, the implication is that heavy is healthy. I mean, we had William Howard Taft as president. He was large enough they had to install a special bathroom in the White House just so he could fit into the tub. So again, at a time when the average age might be around 47 or 48 in terms of lifespan, healthy was a good marker based on the appearance of chubby. Initially, 6 million children were screened, and ultimately over 7 million children were screened with height and weight and measurements. There was the back-to-school drive, as I mentioned, children back in school, soldiers back in jobs, and recreational play, making sure that children had the opportunity not only for education, but for physical fitness. So this is a poster from New York. And again, it's the same implication. To the Mayor's Committee of Women on National Defense, may every child in Greater New York be as happy as this. We need money, we need workers, we need you. So this was a campaign. This was something that was going to energize people. And a question was raised earlier, could this kind of program exist nowadays? I'm not exactly sure we have 17 million women who are not employed enough to sort of be representative in this kind of program. I'd like to think that this kind of program is a possibility in terms of promoting the health and well-being of children, but it was an opportunity at that time for women to reach out and actually do a very credible job at a time when women were not allowed to vote. That really didn't happen until the early 1920s. So we'll talk a little bit about the extraordinary contribution by the Women's Committee, but by the same token, again, these were people who had not received universal suffrage as yet. So again, there were posters everywhere. The government asked you through the Federal Children's Bureau and the National Council of Defense to have all your children under 5 years of age weighed and measured. Again, as a marker for health, as a marker to make sure that the children were growing and thriving. And again, the comment from Woodrow Wilson. So, was it a national program? Yeah. Did it reach into local areas? It did, including Brockton, Massachusetts. In cooperation with the Children's Bureau of the United States government, a weighing and measuring station for children under the age of 5 will be located on our second floor of the James Edgar Company in Brockton, Massachusetts. And of course, the trivia question for the night is, what else is the James Edgar department store famous for in Brockton? Say again? That's correct. James Edgar had the first department store Santa in the United States. It says a higher standard of physical fitness in the rising generation can be assured only by greater attention to the physical condition of children of preschool age. Again, the emphasis here is to make sure that children have the opportunity to grow and develop in a healthy way. If your child is below the average weight, or for his height, or very small for his age, Uncle Sam, through his helpers in Brockton, will give expert advice about diet and daily care. So come on in. And the mayor's baby will be the first to be weighed. There were programs everywhere. American business never wanted to not take advantage of a marketing opportunity. So Filene's in Boston said, we have 6 nurses employed at the children's departments. When you come in for information about your child's health and well-being, we have somebody there to assist you. Never let business opportunity go unmet. This is another one that says Mayor's Baby to start the campaign. Just pass this around. You have to have really good eyes to read the font. And this one is entitled, from the Brockton Times, ultimately the Brockton Enterprise, Weighing the Mayor's Baby. Well, for a week in Brockton is opened auspiciously. So 200 of Brockton's little folks tipped the scales Monday on the first day of the canvass for babies' weight and height, which is part of Brockton's efforts toward the conservation of child life in conjunction with a nationwide campaign. Clement E. Daly, 18-month-old son of Fire Chief William F. Daly, was the largest baby for his size, weighed, tipping the scales at 27 pounds. Very fine, healthy baby, was the doctor's comment.
18 months, 27 pounds. So with the modern scale, how was that at that time?
Back then, he would have been obese, actually. Yeah.
BMI, more than 91%, 99%.
Yeah. So, once, twice, thrice, little Billy ventured to smile for the picture man, not embarrassed in the least that he was the center of the spotlight. Later, he was taken to a special corner reserved for infants and their mothers, where he was weighed and measured. So
at the time, 200 babies in Brockton would have been like what percentage of the babies in Brockton?
You know, the population of Brockton has really not changed in the last 100 years. So they've been quoting the population as around 90 to 95,000 for the last 100 years, it hasn't grown. And it's said that statistically a third of the individuals at that time, remembering too that the average lifespan might be as little as 47 to 48, was about a third. So figure that there were going to be 30,000 children from
So it's
birth
really
to
small
18.
percentage that actually
Yep.
came and participated.
Right, but except it was an ongoing program for an entire year.
Right.
So,
There was no car, no nothing, we
No.
had to walk.
well, yeah, but people did walk, and we'll get some good shots of infant strollers in a moment, but people did walk. And Easton should not be neglected. In fact, we have the statement here that Mary Ames Frothingham of Northeastern presented in a program talking about the difficulty for France for children and families. So again, measurement height and weight conducted by nurses at various sites, sometimes associated with physician examination. The problems found, if there were issues, the children who might have medical issues were referred to, at that time, private physicians. And the purpose, the intent of the program was not treatment, but diagnosis, to try and identify issues. One other issue that the Children's Year program dealt with was just the safety of milk. This may seem sort of like a not terribly big issue, but realistically, milk was often adulterated, and they contained a number of things beyond being diluted with things like lime and contaminated water. So the notion of having safe milk was also something that was dealt with in a very real way for children. As a pediatrician, you sort of have to know where you've come from. Where were pediatricians? What were their thoughts at the time? Well, frankly, most pediatricians didn't call themselves pediatricians at the time, because the notion of having somebody just for children was not a terribly common concept. Abraham Jacobi, the father of American pediatrics, said, "I'm unable to support myself simply by seeing children." This was an individual who, in his autobiography, talked very passionately about the fact that his son died from diphtheria. Isaac Apt, the first president of the Academy of Pediatrics, in the old days, I had no time for a child who appeared to be well. And I guess the operation issue there is appeared to be well. Emmett Holt, on the other hand, built up his practice with academic appointments just so he could appear to appeal to wealthy moms. But as an extension of the Children's Bureau program, it was a year-long program, but the whole concept didn't disappear. I think as part of the weighing and measuring, people began to appreciate the fact that there would be some value in the notion not of treatment, but of prevention. And the Children's Bureau also continued with the program. They produced a number of pamphlets to deal with the realities of the change, the paradigm shifting that was occurring in terms of how children were to be cared for and how they were to be dealt with in sort of a preventative pediatric manner. The notion of children's health centers, setting up programs where people could go to address the issues. Again, the good old days, and not too many cars. I mean, if a family had one car, they were wealthy. So people tended to walk everywhere, and babies were in these strollers. I think it's, I guess I have this image of congestion on 128.
Perambulator.
Say again?
Perambulator.
Yeah, perambulator.
That is the English word.
Yeah. Here's a picture of my office. No, just kidding. So there were programs that were set up to allow people to congregate, and clearly insurance was not much of an issue. The issue there was more access at the time. So during the second and third decades of the century, the Well Baby Conference, which is what you saw there, morphed into the Well Baby Exam. And I think there were a couple of templates that I've received from other physicians looking at the issues related to what were the concerns. You know, well, you had the name of the child, the address, age of the child, and gender, obviously. Not terribly thoughtful in terms of ethnicity issues on the form at the time. Where was mom born? Who's the examiner? And primary issue was weight issues. And that was, I think, a beginning. But as templates evolved, this one I received from Ed Shore, who's the chair of the Commonwealth Fund, they began to think a little more thoughtfully about medical issues in child development. And nowadays we'd call this a template. You know, clearly this is the kind of issue that there's some opportunity to organize the information. I've always appreciated the fact that here they talk about breastfeeding exclusively. I mean, even back in the late teens, early 20s of the last century. How long was the child breastfed? And if you look at the illnesses, you know, measles, whooping cough, respiratory disease, these were the expected kinds of things for children to get. Cholera, of course, is an illness that really does occur because of poor water supply. But these were the expectations that children would get these illnesses. And in no small way, you know, I find it interesting nowadays because we as physicians are constantly asked about, but do I really want to get that vaccine? And I really kind of say, yeah, you really, really do. People talk about the good old days. They really weren't that good.
But
So,
here I see the previous illness, so what was the chance of surviving with those illnesses in childhood?
yeah. Well,
Very, very dangerous.
you know, I mean, for whooping cough, if you've acquired whooping cough prior to the age of a year, death and disability was a real possibility. Death from
Right.
asphyxia, but
Recovery in childhood from any of these diseases
Yeah.
is a miracle.
yeah, well, again, people talk about the good old days. They were not that good. So, you know, we didn't create the initial demand for well child care, but we sort of glommed onto it as pediatricians. And from a historical point of view, I often wonder where we come from, where we're going. And I really do think that in no small way, these kinds of children's clinics, these kinds of child conferences probably set the stage for what ultimately became what I've been doing for the last 42 years. So social movements underwrote the invention of the service. It financed the initial delivery through government grants. We persuaded parents of its merit. A lot of publications. Again, I mean, the Children's Bureau has an enormous catalog of publications they put over, and they still exist as a much smaller entity within our federal government. We capitalized on it, and we eventually, like I said, co-opted the service. Periodicity schedule is a document for pediatricians that talks about what we should be accomplishing at our well visits. And the average primary care pediatrician is going to see about 50 well exams in the course of an average week. And that's a lot of what we do, is about half time is in fact well child care. The Bright Futures program talked about the need for preventative services, and again, that's 31 preventative visits from birth through age 21 for an individual child. The core content of what we do is, diet, nutrition, discipline, sleeping, physical development, safety, and obviously vaccines. But a lot of other add-ons nowadays, child care, television, video games, phones, tablet devices, family issues, obesity, violence prevention, literary promotion, and I mean, the range of topics goes on and on. When I actually chaired the committee on practice for the Academy some years ago, and periodically we would have people coming in saying, let's add this to your periodicity schedule, and we sort of ran out of room in terms of the range of topics that they wanted to add into the process. So, is it effective? Absolutely. For safety promotion, we know that it works. We know that vaccines are safe and effective. I underline the word safe and effective. And reading, the Reach Out and Read program has really done a nice job for kids. A lot of the other things we do are so-called evidence-informed, not necessarily evidence-based. It's hard to prove what you've accomplished with the care of a child until they become adults. I mean, if you've done a decent job, hopefully, then they grow up into healthy adults. So is this model going to work in the future? It's a fair question. I think we really have to stop calling socioeconomic and behavioral issues the new morbidity. I mean, that was a term that was started by a fellow named Bob Haggerty in Rochester. And at the time, it made a lot of sense, but I think it's not the new morbidity anymore. It's what we deal with on a day-to-day basis in terms of the care for children. I do think the content of well care is going to need to change for us as physicians and for our patients. And we obviously need to make sure that we're capturing the management of common specialty issues. So, we talk a little bit about the obesity-hunger paradox. The hungriest people in America are usually the most obese because of the types of food they have access to. And hunger and obesity are both manifestations of poverty. So, based on the issue of obesity alone, which has an enormous impact on our patients, is it time for the next Children's Year campaign dealing specifically with that paradox? Bob Dylan said, when will they ever learn? A program called Early Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment was created by Medicaid due to health issues for recruits during the Vietnam War. So it's like we had to do it all over again. In fact, a third, again, of the initial recruits were ineligible for service. And currently, it's estimated that 75% of 17 to 24-year-olds applying for military service are either undereducated or overweight. That obviously rises to the level of national crisis. And again, the hidden agenda, when I said at the beginning that that little guy over there being measured had a sailor suit on, I mean, the hidden agenda of this program is to make sure that there were recruits available who could serve successfully in the military. The Children's Bureau has had its programs and size reduced over the years. I really would like to think that the federal government needs to once again think about the idea of acknowledging that children are our future, and the notion needs to be looked at that says we need to view this as a national campaign. Now, do I think it's possible that there'll be 17 million women available to help out in this situation? I don't think there'll be 17,000 committees available either, because I think women have other demands. But I do think the program highlights, again, the impact that women had on America during the war. And I don't think in any small way it hurt going forward when women finally did receive the vote in the early 1920s. I don't think that this program, in terms of their contributions, hurt the situation at all. So sometimes in little things, great things start. This simple act of weighing and measuring was something that was looked at as an identifiable need and was capitalized on. And again, I would emphasize that, as the slide says, the health of the child is the power of the nation. So I appreciate your coming out tonight. I appreciate your interest, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
In those days, you also you talked about the diversity, the picture is not diverse, but that never came in my mind. The reason the federal government will never acknowledge students here, again perhaps, because there will be very diversity in such a way that a lot of folks will never recognize that the country changed this much.
Yeah.
But when you said that, then only I noticed it, because, so when we read about Cinderella kind of stories, we do not think about diversity there. But these days, so much
Yeah.
diversity focused things are happening all the way.
Yeah.
So acknowledging children's year again by federal government, there has to be change, a radical change in many places before that.
I would hope that even with both sides of the aisle in Washington, the issues of the needs for children could be something that would allow them to come together. That's my hope. It's not my belief necessarily, but it's my hope.
But one thing I noticed in one of your final slides, that 75% of 70 to 24 years are ineligible. It's a very big number, and
Yeah.
we do not, when we walk around here, we don't think that way.
I'm surprised by the undereducated as well as overweight, that
Yeah.
surprised
Right.
me very much,
Yeah.
yeah.
Overweight and under, these are very, very
Yes, I
real
know, but
things.
that doesn't mean they're undereducated, they just don't like to show it. I know the difference
I heard two
between the
people
two.
discussing in a story yesterday, that nobody under the age of 25 can make change anymore. 'Cause
Oh, I
they don't
believe
have
that,
to.
I believe that.
That's simple math.
But when you think about it, I mean, go back in time, and we're not that old, I don't think. But we used to do the little, things in school with first, second grade, and it had pictures of the penny, the nickel, the dime. None of that happens anymore. The simple thing of looking at the face of the clock. I still have a rotary phone because I have a house, the old house that's got a telephone table fits in the house. And every little one that comes into my house is like, and when you try to show them how to dial the telephone, they're like, what? It's so foreign to them, you know? But it just took me by surprise that number would be that large for that age group for undereducation.
75% is a very
Very
big number,
interesting.
yes.
And at the time too, that initiative, one of the reasons, because they were looking parts of the weights and measures, back to school, and then the recreation drive to, they had to do back to school because they had said that the recruits, as been mentioned too, that were there, they were not only malnourished, but also illiterate. And it was hard for a soldier, when you're given a manual how to put your rifle together, they couldn't read. Some couldn't even write their name right too. That's why this pushed the initiative to go back to school and to learn.
Well, my grandfather, who I said worked in the shoe factory, he was in World War I, and he only went to school till the 8th grade. Yeah, and I mean, he went on to have a fine life and worked in the shoe factory and owned a home and raised his children and everything else. But it was never even discussed as a, oh my goodness moment, it was just what happened, that just.
No, it was
happened.
difficult those days, because in those days, preparing the children for the school in the morning, there was no washing machine, no nothing in the kitchen, mother has to do everything by hand, washing the clothes, drying it for the
But that
children.
didn't stop us from going to school, I
No,
never think so.
no. You have to prepare, and also the family, these days families are small, but in those days, because of the uncertainty of the life, the families used to be a little bit larger than what we have these days.
Yeah.
So we cannot blame, but things are changing, a lot of things.
Yeah.
But these are the things you collected.
Yes.
What
And
So
next
how
election?
do you preserve it, in the wall or somewhere else? Or-
Well, it's at home. It's over my mantle.
Pardon me?
It's over my mantle in my study.
That particular one, he has a study and it's over the mantle, and the other one is just kind of
That's Jeffrey's
around the
project.
house. This is a project that, because it's been a family collaborative.
Uh-huh.
Jeffrey, what we call, he took the museum course actually at Ames.
Oh.
It was actually, he loved it. But because he grew up with these prints, this was one, just project they gave. And then he put together, you can look at it, please, just different things that are, it tells about, well, it gives President Wilson's endorsement of this, and then it just goes on. And one picture that Peter had shown, this was an interactive project too, because it should have a scale here, so the kids that come could get on the scale, and there were cards that they could write their own weight and height and everything.
Did he actually set it up in a museum?
No, this was
He
just a
should-
class.
He should send it to the Scottish Rite Museum up in
Oh,
Arlington, I believe.
been there.
That's the type of thing they love.
Well,
They love
oh,
something
I'm
like
not
that.
sure, because we've been there for some of their.
Well, I've been
exhibits,
there for
the
some
wonderful
great
too.
stuff, and I've been
I know.
to some that weren't
No,
so
but
great.
this is
but
why
it's
I
kind of
guess
a
the
neat-
library, because, they're always looking for different
Yeah,
things. But,
that's a great thing.
I mean, it just shows the different initiatives, and again, Peter had touched on some of the things, the propaganda, because, we're all used to propaganda during
Mhm.
World War I too. That was a big thing, so that, they used kids, also pictures of kids, and just the patriotic theme. You have to get out there because this is supporting our nation, to be really patriotic.
So do you find it difficult when the kids come in now with the overweight issue? Is that, you're talking about diversity, there's so many different cultures that have come to this country that our
Sure.
way of eating is so different from their cultural way that
Right.
of course it affects their weights and all that. Is that a tough subject to bring
Well,
about with the families? And-
Yes and no. I mean, I think everybody wants to see the measurements. I mean, I guess maybe the legacy here is height and weight, and now we have a BMI, which is a calculation related to looking at the height and weight parameters together. And it's an opportunity to open up the growth chart and say to people, he's growing great, maybe a little too great, and we talk about nutrition. I think we've all figured out the thing that gets us all in trouble are these wonderful things called carbohydrates. So trying to convince kids that they love fruits and vegetables and don't want to eat lots of carbs is challenging. I go through a whole litany of white carbs are now officially unfashionable. Brown carbs are fashionable. The ultimate waste of calories is soda with sugar. The Academy of Pediatrics says no more than 6 to 8 ounces of juice a day. And breakfast cereals should be brown. I know Cocoa Puffs are brown, but you know where I'm going with this. And that's at least a way of trying to introduce the topic and say, we're not going to stop people from eating. And I do ask people, when you go to a restaurant, do you think that's a meal? And they say, yeah. And I said, no, it's 2 meals. You're paying a lot of money. So in fact, you have to get value for your money. And I say to people, would you bring it home? No, we eat it there, or we leave it. I said, no, bring it home. If you liked it that much initially, bring it home. It's a matter of just simply reducing portion size and getting the right kind of carbs.
So do you find that with that, conversation with families year to year that you see that some of them are receptive and listening? And you feel like, how's the fight going? That's basically as I could put it.
Mixed, yeah.
So where do you practice? I'm sorry.
Brockton?
In Brockton. Because I think that part of my, I'm a little bit frustrated because from this campaign, it shows that there was an effort.
Mhm.
And I just feel like currently, there is such a gap in the socioeconomic. And I feel like parents aren't home anymore to try to even make sure their kids are eating properly and things
Mhm.
like that. And so the kids, a lot of times kids get 2 of their 3 meals from school. And even the meals that the schools are feeding them are disgusting. I think they, high fructose corn syrup is one of the first listed ingredients. And schools give now 20 minutes of recess time. It's not just the parents, that are part of the problem. And there doesn't seem to be any effort to fix, what's causing the discrepancy for our health and of our children.
Yeah. Well, the Reagan administration did make ketchup a vegetable. So.
I think physical activity has totally dropped.
Yeah.
Compared to my children and what it is. I opened my back door and they went out and played, and by the time I called them in, they were spent. Okay, good, time to take a bath, time to go to bed. Okay, good, you're done. Because that's it.
They were also more active
And they're out on the
school.
street, but now they're, because of people working constantly and doing everything, parents pick children up at 6, 7 o'clock at night at daycares or wherever they are, or even at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they don't have time to So I think the whole society, and I
That's
also
what I'm
think that,
saying, like,
that
it's a
education
multifaceted problem.
is not what it used to be. I think that they've pulled so much money from our education that the phys ed is not supposed, even arts, let's just go to art. These children not only just don't have phys ed, instead they'll eat, whereas it could have been a play that they could have been practicing for, or music instruments, or an art class they could do instead of going home and eating, or even, so you've got all these institutions like the Y's, after-school care, they're the ones now that are trying to fit in the activities, keep the children healthy, healthy minds make healthy bodies. So I just think there's just, this society is just a little off.
It's a lot off.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, like,
You know, I do think, I will say that it troubles me that I do have patients who tell me sometimes, you know, coming from Brockton, that they're afraid to go out and be active in play. It was a little bit of a sadistic chuckle when I sent my sister a clipping from the Enterprise about a drive-by shooting on Tremont Street in Brockton, which was the house I grew up in. And so you really didn't think much about drive-by shootings in Brockton back when I was a kid. And of course, the safety issue was go to Edgar's playground today, and when the streetlights come on, come home. That was the program.
Yes.
But you can't do that anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you even have your child like go around the block, there's a fear that somebody would call social services that you're not watching your
You're
child.
free-ranging your child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that, you know,
Yeah.
there's just,
It is, it's a difficult spot to be in, for sure.
I have a question about this particular time. Do you think that the Bureau was influential at all in developing the immediacy, or that there was some other system that was in place to deal with the epidemic of the flu?
Yeah. You know, I don't think that was a major priority. I do think, as my wife, I think, has pointed out correctly, that the fact that the great pandemic of 1919 came, it really overshadowed a lot of the history of this program, because people were so focused on the realities of the so-called Spanish flu at the time, that other stuff got, I think, pushed to the side. And I think it was a time of great chaos, great disorganization because of the flu. I mean, it's said that more people died from the flu than died in World War I. That's quite extraordinary when you think about it, you know? So no, I'm not sure that the Children's Year really was here to promote, you know, those issues related to the community down with children. And again, the ideal would be obviously to have a flu vaccine, which they didn't obviously in that period of time. But even the use of flu vaccine in this country really goes back universally only to about a decade. Because for years we used to tell people, you can have a flu vaccine, you can't. And I always thought there was a little bit of competition for some people. I really want a flu vaccine, but even universal flu vaccination is not.
Well, it must have been available in some sections, because I remember as a kid, first thing my mother did was take 4 children down to get measles.
Oh, measles, yeah, yeah. I think measles was a different discussion. I think people.
Diphtheria and what was the other one? 3. DPT, yeah.
Yeah,
Tuss-
pertussis, yeah.
And that was, to me, felt like it was standard, because we always got checked up and
Yeah.
put on more.
But universal flu vaccination didn't happen until about a decade ago, because at that time there was a shortage of flu vaccine comparatively, and so only people who were at high risk got the vaccine. But then people began to figure out that perfectly normal patients, children, you know, without any underlying illness, can get flu and die. And that's where the notion of universal vaccination after 6 months came from.
polio was a good vaccine too at that time. It was one of the, beside all those, I remember always getting a polio vaccine.
And if you come from a third world country, you've seen so many kids with polio, classmates walking with crutches. It's unbelievable.
Not anymore.
Yeah, well, we had friends in our class who
Yeah.
had the polio, and so we knew that.
Yeah,
That was
So
in
it makes us
60s.
very sad when we see a parent here
yeah.
refusing to have their children vaccinated when you have everything. It's
Yeah.
sad.
it's just.
And immunization has made things so much
No, there is
easier.
a controversy with the DPT these days, not
No,
other vaccines.
no,
Particularly the DPT, the measles vaccine,
Yeah, the
Which one?
MMR is the one.
MMR, yes.
But that's controversial. It has nothing.
Because it has some mercury in it or something like that, and.
Well, there's no mercury in individual dose vials. In other words, if you have mercury preservatives, it's only in multi-dose vials. And you have to have a preservative in multi-dose vials because people are entering and leaving the vial. You know, you have to make sure that it doesn't cause contamination. But I think that the challenging part about the immunization refusers, I've stopped calling people who don't want vaccines as anti-vaccine. I now refer to them as pro-disease.
That's a thought.
You're in favor of disease. Way to go.
Can I ask you about the chart for the height and weight? Because obviously children are much taller than they used to be.
Yeah.
When or have they changed that chart to adjust to the generation of children
New
that we
trend.
now have?
They have, yeah. I mean, the original stuff was based on children's height and weight in Denver in the 1960s, but there have been several other attempts to deal not only with current data for normal kids, but even some adjusted growth charts for kids with chronic illness, like for kids with Down syndrome or trisomy 21. There's now a separate growth chart for those kids. So the answer is, yeah, there is comparatively new data that's updated.
Because they used to say my son, well, they said all my kids were off the chart, but my youngest one, he's off the chart, he's off the chart. He eventually grew to be 6'8".
Well, he's-
Kind of like, he was off the chart.
He's off the chart.
And he towered over everybody in 6th grade. I mean, 6'8" came in high school, but still. And so I often wondered that, because they kept saying, he's off the charts, he's off the charts. It's like, well, make a new
Put a
chart
chart
then.
Yeah, the data has been updated.
Oh,
Statistics are only statistics.
Anyway, one child will never feed everybody because of the diversity in this population. The first generation of Asian children can never match with the 10th generation of European child here.
mm.
So,
So the little, the test that you're giving them too is to go into the library and find which section of the library you'll find this particular
Oh, okay.
print,
Poster.
Okay.
the posters in the library.
Nice.
It's not ours, yes, because they have one here too.
And did they say that they had it for a long, long time? Is it really
Yeah,
sticking
I guess
around?
so. I mean, I guess they've been sort of rolled up in a corner for a while, and they had them framed and they had them posted.
so your,
But I'm not sure they knew what they had.
Question is,
Wow.
where is this
Yeah, where it's located.
in this Ames library?
Mhm.
Mhm.
We have to take a field trip.
Right, you
Find
have
out.
to take a field trip and, just see you going through getting the book.
And they have some other nice, nutritional, promotional kind of posters too. That's actually some very nicely done.
Really interesting. Thank you very much.
So how
Thank you.
library got this exactly this color picture, they have it there or black and white?
How they got it, I have no idea. But
It's a color picture
But
like
I'm
this.
so glad
It's
that
just
Dr.
like
Apple had it
this,
together.
It's just like that, when
Yeah.
only it's
Just like that, they
framed
have
in
a,
black.
they have a copy in the library?
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's on hanging on the wall. After they had redone the library years ago, I noticed it downstairs. I was just walking through a garden and I
I'm-
we had that.
I'm quite sure tens of thousands of these posters were produced, and they were distributed probably to any number of groups, including libraries, to promote the programs. I haven't found any data yet about programs in Easton per se, but I'm sure they happened.
Did you have any information about whether or not it was more popular in cities? Did it make it all the way out to the Midwest? You know what I'm saying? Did
Yeah.
you have any
Well,
information like that?
My wife and I have a tradition that we try every year to go watch the Red Sox lose in a different city. And part of our searching, we'd go to a large metropolitan library in each of these cities and find data. I mean, we found some interesting issues about promotion in Cleveland. And what was surprising to us, the National World War I Memorial and Museum is in Kansas City. And we thought this would be a great place to learn about the Children's Year, obviously. They had never heard of it,
Oh, my goodness.
the National Museum, World War I.
Everything wasn't up to date in Kansas City.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so,
Ah,
Oh, that's interesting.
So maybe farm kids didn't need, they
No, I
weren't as
think a
well
lot of
known,
them did.
but
I
they
mean, they
did
did.
eat.
you know, because they were visiting nurses. I mean, there were women that went out to
The only
rural
place you really have
areas.
yeah.
to be really concerned is Appalachia.
I think part of the concern, frankly, I didn't really get into decrepit housing, but part of the concern really was just in the tenements, the sort of the ghettos at the time. there was not an opportunity for fresh air. I mean, I trained, my wife trained me, and I trained at the Boston Floating Hospital, which was the pediatric division of Tufts. And the Boston Floating Hospital one time was a hospital ship. And the theory was that you put, kids from the slums of Boston onto the boat and took them out into the harbor. I'm trying to envision, Boston Harbor as being this terribly,
Clean, fresh air.
place. But that was the notion, that in fact you had to get people cooling breezes because there really was no air conditioning, there was no ventilation. And part of the issue with illness, of course, is just closeness and spread.
Well, that was like wondering about the Midwest because of the orphan trains,
Mm-hmm.
where they shipped all the kids out to the farms, and I just wondered if that was part of the trace, but, it might be too much of we're a little bit more traceable nowadays than they were
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
Because that would have been around that same time, the orphan trains, I believe. Might have been a little before.
Not sure.
That's another.
Another project?
It's another chicken that just sent you on a mission on Google.
Yeah. So everybody should check out the Children's Year Museum over there. And again, we've had this sitting in our house for a couple of years now, and I don't think my wife can bear to throw it out.
Oh, I don't blame her, it looks awesome.
So Easton also has a children's museum, so instead of
Mhm.
selling the poster in the museum, they have it in the library.
Well, the children there are too young to read this one,
Yeah.
or at least think about it.
So I guess it is an artwork, not a photograph.
It's art, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It is, I forget now who designed that too, because it was famous, and then, I don't know if it was Mora or.
Yeah, Mora.
Was
It's
it?
Luis Mora. It was the artist.
Are you going on the Antiques Roadshow with that?
We've already
Just-
looked
no,
at
just
it.
I
checking.
would not part with that.
It's,
It's more for education of the people.
1999, you can get two.
Immediately the guy will tell him, no, this is a fake one, because of such and such things I see. That's a very, very interesting show. Long, 90% of the participants who go there, they return disappointed because they are in possession of a fake thing, not the real.
I just think they should bring awareness to it,
Yeah.
just go on for that purpose, The heck with how much it's worth, I'd like you people to know about this.
but people always want to know what it's worth too. Then.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think also you have to figure out where they are having it, because
So maybe with the success of some of the children's baking and cooking chef programs, it will filter down so that there are nutritional meals that children are cooking for other children.
Well, there's the point again about what they've taken away from our classrooms. They don't have home ec anymore. And
No.
those things are how you touch those kids. That's how you start the basic, conversation. Back this time, when they did have home economics and things like that, they were teaching them as much life skills as they were to take care of themselves and potentially members of the family at home. And now you've taken that opportunity away from this generation of kids, and that's unfortunate.
Just about the time when they started teaching girls how to do shop and guys how to do home ec, they took it all
They
away.
took it all away, just
So
when they
there's no
finally leveled off.
quality in their They call them method. Yeah.
I guess ladies will have to start a committee.
That's
So that
it.
we-
That
Well, I was
was
gonna
our
ask,
next committee.
Maybe one of the
in setting it
committees.
up, when the trickle down from the top came, what level did they start adding women to their committees? Because all of the guys you mentioned in the beginning were all government officials, and they were obviously all men.
Right.
And then they went to the state level, and those guys were men, and they went to, where did they
No,
get this?
no.
Who asked for the 17,000 women?
They were volunteers who were promoting the program, who actually believed. Again, it was a time of war, remember? So I think people during that kind of situation always want to
They
do,
always-
contribute, help.
So did they have more women participants who came from the professions, like the social workers who?
Some, I think they were there as assistants, but I think the bulk of them were matrons, if that's the right word, who were involved in, felt passionately about this program. I think women's groups have gotten together for a number of reasons over the
Oh, yeah.
over the last.
My grandmother did.
many years, so,
Yeah,
and it's what you did.
amazing.
I got the sense that it was the women's groups, you know, I mean, they were just in the towns, I mean, maybe it wasn't,
But somebody had
again,
to
socioeconomic.
bring it forward to them to say, this needs to be filled, and those people would obviously jump on it.
But they gave them the templates. They said, this is the drive, this is what we're interested in talking about. And the major initiative is what it says there, saving 100,000 babies. I mean, in theory, by the way, there were still gonna be 300,000 babies who were gonna die, if you can envision that at that time. But they were saying, let's save 100,000 of it if we can. And there were suggestions that the kind of conditions that, impacted kids in childhood could be dealt with successfully. There's even something as simple as rickets. People figured out that you could prevent rickets with sunlight. And you didn't have a lot of sunlight in tenements.
But it was not known those days, I guess.
Well, no, I have, somewhere on my floating hospital files, I have some photos of children. It kind of looks like a cage, but they're on the ship. There's a metal cage that's outward, and they're getting, their little butts are in the air, and they're getting sun exposure in this cage on the floating hospital ship. So yeah, they understood that rickets could be dealt with by sunlight, even back then.
Anyway, 100 years ago, almost, somebody thought about this. I mean, I don't see any other country did this.
Well, no,
They have to start somewhere.
they did, but no-
I think they did a great job.
Well, actually, I didn't really get into it, but they glommed onto the programs that were going on in France and England at the time. They were very much concerned that ultimately, if you don't have healthy women and children, you don't have a nation. So no, I think there was a certain amount of improve constantly, steal shamelessly. They actually got some of their ideas from both England and France.
It is a very nice drawing, very nice.
Thank you, Dr. Rao.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you so much.